Please turn in your Bibles to Habakkuk chapter 2. We're beginning Habakkuk chapter 2 in just a moment, verse 17. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 17. We are continuing our study of prophecy that Habakkuk has revealed. And we have explained that Habakkuk lived during what we call the period of the divided, Judah alone rather, after the northern nation fell, Israel, and Judah remained alone. But God has prophesied that Judah would also fall. But Habakkuk has a problem that relates to the punishment of Judah, and that's the topic of our discussion this evening. So, what question did Habakkuk begin with at the beginning of his prophecy? What was his question at the beginning? Frank.
How long will you allow this violence to go on?
Okay, so he's observing violence, sin, evil in Judah, and the authorities were not solving the problem. How long was he going to allow it to continue? And what was God's answer to that question? Want to know how long it would be? What was the answer that God gave him? Terry.
I see what's going on. I know what's happening, and I'm going to handle it.
And how was he going to handle it?
He would repay them. Just watch, he said, what him to do. He's going to punish those that are wicked.
Okay. Specifically, he's going to send the Chaldeans as punishment. And so that led to another question that Habakkuk had. And what was that? So the first question is, what's going to happen? What are you going to do about the evil here? And the second question, well, then the answer was he was going to punish them by sending the Chaldeans, but then that led to another question, which was what?
Why are you using such an evil people to punish your people?
Okay, so why use such an evil nation to punish your own people when they're not as bad as the ones you're using to punish them? So he begins with his question of why evil is not punished, and God says he's going to send the Chaldeans. And he describes in that first chapter at length the evil. He knows that they're evil. And so Habakkuk asks, why are you going to then use this evil nation to punish your people? And so that's the question that he asks. And God is now answering that question in chapter 2. And he especially emphasizes in verse 4 that where those who are proud, that's the Chaldeans in particular, he says, the just shall live by his faith. And it's a lesson in faith for Habakkuk and for all of us to trust God to do what's right in these situations. And that's really the message of the book. We'll see that as we proceed. So as chapter 2 proceeds then, he describes the evils of Babylon by discussing 5 woes against them. We studied the first 4 last time. So he says that there are woes upon them for various reasons. So what were some of the reasons that he's given in the study to this part? Where he starts in verse 6 and continues through the end of the chapter. What are some of the things he pronounces woes upon Babylon or the Chaldeans for? What's one of the things? He said, woe to them for what? Rick.
Woe to him that takes things from other people for himself.
Okay, one who takes from others for his own gain, increases for himself by taking from others. Verse 6. What other woes did he pronounce upon them? That was the first one. There are at least 3 more we studied. What was another one? Frank.
Woe to him who gets evil gain for his own use and sets his nest on high. He thinks he has security, but it's all going to fall away.
Okay, so verse 9, the woe was when he uses evil for the protection of his house. Takes from others, thinking that he will be secure in the wealth and power that he's gained. Okay? Another one. was another woe. Terry?
When they built a city on bloodshed and iniquity.
Okay, verse 12, he uses bloodshed to establish himself. And then the fourth one in verse 15 talked about getting his neighbor drunk in order to take advantage of him. So those are the ones we've studied so far. He increases that which does not belong to him. He uses these evil gain for his own security or self-protection. Practices violence and makes his neighbor drunk to exploit him. And that was where we were at the end of class last time, ready for verse 17, showing that despite that what they had done for their own benefit, their own gain, it's not going to end up being for their benefit at all. So we'll take up in verse 17 then in just a moment. Questions or discussion through verse 16, anybody? Frank?
The cup in the Lord's right hand. Let's see. Talking about drinking yourself and showing your shame, and the cup in the Lord's right hand will come around you, and utter shame will come upon you, upon your glory. They're talking about the punishment that God will give out to them. That cup.
Yes, I think that's what it is. We talked about that a little bit last time. I think that drinking a cup is often used to refer to something bitter, something that you would drink that would be actually a symbol of suffering. Jesus said he was going to drink the cup when he died on the cross and so on in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, so God often talks about punishment upon a wicked people as being a cup they would have to drink. So in verses 15 and 16, it seems to me what he's saying is the Babylonians want to make the other people drink the cup, and I don't think the cup, even with the other people, is literal. When it says making them drunk, I think what it's talking about is that he's going to try to make them suffer for their own benefit. That is the Chaldeans' benefit. God says, no, you're the ones who are going to drink the cup. I want to see to it that you drink that cup of suffering and punishment. That's what I took it to mean. Okay, other comments on 15 and 16? Rick?
Right after that it says, and you also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. Now that's saying that they're not God's children, they're not, in the act of not being circumcised itself.
Right. And those who are God's people under the Old Testament were circumcised, and they were demonstrated that they would be uncircumcised because they were not serving God properly. Yeah, that's what I took that to mean too. Yeah, good point. Anything else? All right, so let's go ahead and read the rest of the chapter, and then we'll discuss it further. 17 through 20. Who'd like to read chapter 2, verse 17 through 20 for us, please? Bill, chapter 2, verse 17 through 20, please.
For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which make them afraid because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, and who will all who dwell in it. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it? The molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it, to make mute idols, whom to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise. It shall teach, behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him.
All right, verse 17 then is really still part of the woe that began in verse 15 and 16. And it seems to me, again, there's some symbolism here. We're going to be seeing a lot of symbolism, I think, tonight. But what is the problem that God says the Babylonians are guilty of, or are going to be guilty of in verse 17? What is it that he objects to them about? And let's see, we're on question number 24 now. Why would he bring these consequences upon the Chaldeans according to verse 17? Rick.
The violence of everything they do.
All right, violence. He says specifically against Lebanon, but again, as we've often seen in many illustrations, that's just one example of it. It doesn't mean it's just Lebanon, but many people like Lebanon. Well, what was significant about Lebanon? What was special about Lebanon that they're often known for in prophecy? Anybody know?
And cedar trees.
Yeah, they're trees. They're forests. Beautiful trees. And remember, that's where Solomon went to get the trees for the building the temple and so on. So the beautiful trees, and then it says also the beasts that are there. But again, it's symbolic. So he's doing violence to that which, it seems to me, violence to that which is beautiful and good and wholesome, and yet the Chaldeans don't care about that. They just care about their own plunder, about taking what's for them, what they will benefit them. And so the last part of the verse then shows that the application is that their violence to the people, men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and those who dwell in it. So it seems to me that the destruction upon Lebanon is symbolic of their violence to the people, and how that God is going to punish them, and that's the woe, going back to the woe in verse 16, that's the cup that they wanted other people to drink, but they themselves are the ones who are going to drink it. Okay, other comments on verse 17 as it discusses the woe in verse 15. Anybody else? All right, we have one more woe in verse 18. It begins in verse 18 and it's really stated in verse 19. And what subject is that? Question number 25. He begins with a question. And what is his question? Verse 18. Terry.
What use is the idol that you make for yourself?
What good is an idol? What use is it? What profit is it? And how does he describe it? He describes the idol in what way? And we're going into question 26 now. He's asked questions about it and he answers the question. What does he say about the idol and his description of it? What's an idol like? Verse 18. Rick.
It's a molded image made with hands.
Okay. People make idols. Okay. If the people make the idols, then do the idols make the people? So not, obviously not. So when you're talking about an idol, you're talking about not the creator, not the one who made us, but something that people make, something that they carve it. Okay? What else did he say about it? Terry.
It's speechless. It can't move. It can't speak.
Okay. There's no life there. It's mute. It can't speak. It's a teacher of lies. And if it can't speak, how does it teach lies? What's the sense in which it's a teacher of lies? Rick?
They actually believe that it has some type of power to it, and that they can pray to it, but it don't know nothing. It's solid stone, solid wood, solid whatever. It don't have ears, it can't hear. No power.
Okay, so it's obviously not actually teaching the lie, it's just that the whole thing is a lie. The very existence of the idol and people worshiping it is a lie in and of itself. There's no power there. So the question is, what is there that would cause a people to trust it, to have faith in an idol? Well, of course, the Babylonians trusted idols. Other people did too. The people of Judah did. But the context here, the woe was upon the people of Babylon. In verse 19 then. So what does the people say? He pronounced a woe upon them for saying what? What they want the idol to do. Frank?
Well, they carve the idol, whether it's wood or stone or steel, and then they want it to awaken and serve them as their God.
Okay. So they make it from wood or metal or gold, silver, or whatever, stone. And then what they meant, they said, wake up, wake up. Now, they may not literally say that, but that's the idea. Do something, we benefit us, take care of us, protect us, provide for us. Well, it doesn't, the stone is silent. What's it going to do? It's overlaid with gold and silver, but there's no breath in it at all. If there's no breath in it, what does that tell you about it? It has no breath, what then? It can't talk. It's not alive. It's just dead. And therefore, it can no more do anything for you than before you made the shape of it. If it was just a stone before, you make a special shape, it's still just a stone. If you take a piece of wood and you carve it to a special shape, it's still just a piece of wood. There's nothing there to give you any benefit to the people. And so he pronounces a woe then to those who worship the idols, okay, because of the foolishness of what they're doing. Okay? Other comments through verses 18 and 19 on the worship of the idols. Rick?
Makes you think of today and the Buddhists and all these other religions that actually has statues that they go and pray before.
Yes, and people who do worship the idols think that there's some power behind that. The point is that there isn't any power there. They may think there is, but there isn't any. And yet today, in our society, most people don't actually bow down before a hunk of wood or stone or gold or whatever, but we still think we're going to receive blessings from things that are physical, that have no power really to bless us, rather than the true God. Rather than serving God, they seek blessings in other ways that they surely should turn to God for. Okay? Anything else in verse 19? Now verse 20. In contrast to the idols, what does he say in verse 20? Question number 29. How does he describe God in verse 20? Bill?
The Lord's in his holy temple, and the earth is to keep silent before him.
All right. The Lord is in his holy temple. What's the significance of that? What temple is it talking about here? Is this the temple in Jerusalem? What temple is he in? Heaven. What's going to happen to the temple in Jerusalem? It's going to be destroyed, isn't it? And soon. Don't know exactly when Habakkuk prophesied, but that's what the Babylonians are going to do. They're going to come, they're going to destroy that temple. So the fact that God would be in that temple would not be significant. But God is in his temple. What's the significance of that? If he's in heaven, if he's in his temple, what's the significance? In contrast to those idols.
He's alive.
Yeah. You've got the real God, not the one that can't speak, not the one that can't breathe, that can't live, can't do anything. You've got the true God who created everything and controls everything. You have a comment, Frank?
Yes, he is a living God, and he gives life and counsels and rewards righteousness and punishes wickedness, and provides for all of our daily needs. None of those idols can do that.
All those things that the idols could not do, the true God can do. The Lord is in his holy temple. Now the last part of the verse says, and all the earth keeps silence before him. Now I don't know about you, but when I was younger, we sing the song, and Greg has led it several times recently, this very, word for word, this verse. I used to think when I was younger, why are we singing that we should keep silence? Does that make sense? We're singing out loud that we should keep silence. Well, obviously, but then I realized, wait a minute, it's a scripture. It's a passage, so it must be, just because it didn't seem to make sense to me, there must be some sense to it. So what is the sense to it? What is the significance of it? Velma?
I don't think it's as prevalent today as it was in the past that I'm aware of. But children were told to sit down, have respect, and be silent before someone whom you should pay respect to, which was elder people. In other words, you sit there and be still. Learn a few things.
Okay, But it's the significance of it is respect. Yes, a respectful conduct. It's not just doesn't mean literal, because it isn't saying that the whole earth can't say anything ever. That obviously isn't what it means, and it doesn't even mean in worship that you don't say anything. The point is, it's an attitude of respectfulness. Jason.
Thank you. Kind of following the scriptures there before, the Creator is in heaven, He's alive, and the earth is to be silent. A rock can't speak, a piece of wood can't talk, it can't breathe. The things that He has created is to remain silent while the Lord speaks.
Yes, and I think also in addition to that, don't argue. Don't answer back. Don't think you've got a better answer than God. Respect Him. Ultimately, I think verse 20 is to a large extent God's answer to Habakkuk. How does this answer Habakkuk's concern? What are you going to do about the sin in Judah, Lord? You're going to send about the Chaldeans. Why are you sending them? They're more wicked than the people they're going to punish. How does verse 20 answer Habakkuk's concern?
Says God's in control.
Exactly. That's question number 30, by the way. Yeah. God knows what's going on. He's not like those idols who don't know anything or can't do anything. And He's not gone off on a journey somewhere that He's not closed His eyes. God is in heaven. Respect Him. He knows what He's doing. We've seen it again and again. And that's how God is answering, not directly, but definitely, Habakkuk's concern. God is in charge. He's got a plan. He's going to take care of it. Okay? Other comments? Daryl?
Some of the comments have touched on this already, especially Jason's, but just to emphasize it a bit more, that it's a strong contrast between verses 19 and 20. Verse 19, piece of wood, the rock, they don't say anything. It's the people who are speaking. And that comes out in more than just their statements, awake and arise, but they're the ones who dictate what their religion is, what their principles are, what their morals are, and you see that in a lot of religion today. On the other hand, to serve God, verse 20, the Lord is the one who speaks. He's in His holy temple, and we need to be silent before Him. Okay, so whereas the people, in idolatry, the people decide the way things are going to be. It's their decision. What they say is the way things go. And that's why people like to worship idols, because they get to decide for themselves the way they want the idol to be made and what they think it can do and so on. But with God, no, you listen to God. You don't tell God, you listen to Him. Good point. Frank.
In connection with that, because God is in control, we need to be patient and wait for His judgments.
That's the other side of it, isn't it? Which goes again back to Habakkuk. Don't worry about Habakkuk. Okay, you got questions, I understand, but this is God's department. This is God's end of the stick, as I think Daryl was talking about the other day. Don't try to think that it's up to us to solve all these problems in the world. Let God do His job. Just take care of our job. Don't be trying to tell Him, and don't be doubting Him and arguing with Him. God's in charge. You just listen to Him and do what you're told to do. Now that's hard for us to do, isn't it? Because we want to be in charge, don't we? We want things to go our way. We think we've got good ideas. When you serve God, you listen and you do what He says. Anything else through verse 20? All right, now we get into chapter 3. And now we have Habakkuk's response. And I call it a song of praise. It starts out a prayer, but I think we'll see as we go along that there's, towards the end at least, it's a song. And much of it is symbolic. We're back to symbolism again. But this is Habakkuk's response. God's answered his questions. God said, I'm going to send the Chaldeans to punish the people of Judah. That's the answer to your first question. Said, I'm going to punish the Chaldeans. That's the answer to your second question. I'm in charge. I know what I'm doing. Trust me, Habakkuk. Live by faith. Now, Habakkuk's response in chapter 3, when he learns the lesson, here's how he responds. And the end of the chapter is especially powerful, but he builds up to it as we go through the first verses. So let's read 1 through 7. We'd like to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 for us, please. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. I'd like to read that for us, please. Tim, please.
A prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, on Shigoah. Yeah, whatever. O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One, from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him was pestilence, and forever in fever followed at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian trembled.
All right. Now, obviously, this is a lot of symbolism. Even our songs a lot of times are symbolic, but especially these kinds of songs in the Old Testament are often symbolic. So now Habakkuk's responding, and did anybody find out what this Shigionoth means? Anybody look that up? Terry?
And what I saw was that it indicated it was said or sung with music, very excited music.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought too. And I don't know if anybody really knows, but it's a style of poetry that's very emotional, very full of emphasis and meaning. Okay, which it certainly would be as a response to the things that Habakkuk has learned. Okay, so this is his response, beginning in verse 2. He's heard God's speech, and how did he respond? What does he say to God in verse 2? Bill?
He was afraid.
First of all, he's afraid. Why would he be afraid? Why would he respond with? In fact, as you read through a lot of this, these next verses, there's trembling, and mountains are bowing, and so on. Trembling, verse 7. Why would there be fear, trembling, in response to what Habakkuk has learned in those first two chapters? Rick?
See the awesome power that God has.
Okay. God is saying, I'm in charge. I'm going to take care of this. The response ought to be fear. Not necessarily fear in the sense that we don't want to be around God. Not that kind of fear, but kind of awe, as Rick said, in which we recognize how great God is. God's in charge here. Okay. You are the ruler of the universe. We accept that. And knowing what he said he's going to do to Judah and then to the Chaldeans ought to be a cause of fear. Okay? All right, so he responds with fear. And then what does he say in the last part of verse 2? Bill?
Remember mercy.
Remember mercy. So basically he's saying, revive your work in the midst of your years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. So it seems to me like he's saying, okay, it's your responsibility. You're God. Do it like you said. But remember mercy. Not just punishment. Not just evil as a consequence of the people's sins, but mercy too. And of course, that's the way God is. It's not saying anything bad about him. But Habakkuk is expressing his desire that God will be both wrathful and merciful. upon the people in doing what he said he would do. Okay? Other comments? On verse 2? Okay? Let me see here. All right. Now he's going to proceed to show how God should pray, or the earth should praise God for this, the judgment that he's going to bring. Verse 3, God, he says, where does God come from? God comes from where, verse 3? Teman, from Mount Paran. And his glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard anybody make this statement, but I have. Ask you a question about it. Question number 5. Does somebody, have you ever heard anybody say, well, see, that's where God began. That's the origin of God. There's right there, verse telling what God came from Teman, from Mount Paran. That's the origin of God. Did you think about that? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Question number 5. Well, how would you respond?
Isn't that where the original temple?
Say it again.
Isn't that where the original temple was set up?
No, I don't think so. Let's talk about that. What is Teman and Paran? What are they? Or where are they? Well,
I had thought it might be Mount Sinai.
it's somewhat in that direction. Daryl.
It's a city to the east of Israel, associated with wisdom, wise men. I think Job's friends came from Teman. Do I remember that well? They weren't wise, but it is associated with wisdom and wise thinking.
Okay, other comments? All right, and so being from the east and the southeast is what I've heard. Sun would shine from that direction, and so verse 4, brightness comes and rays flashing from his hands. Verse 4, power and so on. So that this is symbolism again. Got to remember this is symbolism. Okay, so his glory covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise, and his rays of light and so on, which would come from the east, from that direction. Okay, other comments? Terry.
In regard to, I'm sorry, you said Terry.
Yes, I did.
I was thinking the fact that God has explained over and over, I created the earth, so we know he didn't come from the earth.
Okay. All right, so it's kind of silly to think he came from someplace on the earth when he made the earth. And besides that, how long has God been around? He's eternal. He didn't, there's any origin. When you read many other scriptures that show he's eternal, of course there's no origin to God. That's no ideas are rather silly. If I told you that I came here from Illinois, would that necessarily mean that Illinois was my origin? No. It's just where I happened to be before I came here. There's nothing more to this than that. Okay. But the point here is, it's an illustration, again, it's symbolic, of God's power and his brightness and so on. Now, Daryl, did you have something else?
Yeah, I turn back to Job. One of his 3 friends, Eliphaz, was a Temanite, is what was in my mind.
Okay, very good. Okay, anything else through verse 4? All right, now verse 6, what goes before him? Verse 6. So his brightness is coming, again, symbolic of rays from him. Verse 4, what goes before him? Verse 6. 5. Rick.
Same things that he's used time after time to show his power to the people of Israel, and that's pestilence and fevers, sickness, and
Okay, so these are some of the specific manifestations of that wrath back in verse 2. He's going to go ahead and fulfill his plan. He's going to revive his work, verse 2, fulfill his plan. But there's going to be wrath, but Habakkuk asks for mercy. Well, here's some of the wrath now. The power is described with the brightness and so on. There's going to be pestilence and fever accompanying the coming of the Chaldeans and so on. Again, a lot of symbolism and so on. Okay? Now verse 6, what does he do? What does God do in verse 6? Bill.
He measured the earth.
Measured the earth. What's the significance of measuring the earth? God wants to know how big it is. What's he measuring the earth for, Steve?
Possibly the appointment of the land to the tribes of Israel. So,
Again?
the appointment of the land to the tribes of Israel, possibly.
Okay. All right, that's how they divided the land, didn't they? Any other comments on measuring the earth? Rick?
What I've read in a couple of concordances was, it's actually symbolic for shaking the earth.
Symbolic of what?
For shaking the earth.
Oh, okay. All right. That certainly is true of the rest of the verse, isn't it? He startled the nations, and the mountains were scattered. Perpetual hills are bowed, and his ways are everlasting. Other comments on the idea of measuring the earth?
I would think it would refer to a judgment of sorts of earth. Because often they would draw a line,
Okay.
a string with the weight goes on one side or the other.
Okay, Terry, what were you going to say?
The term even to take someone's measure is to make a judgment about it.
Yeah, and that symbolism is used often in Scripture, where God would measure a city or measure a country. Not literally, but the point is he's passing judgment on it. He's evaluating the goodness versus the evil. He's demonstrating what he's demonstrating. Actually, he knows, of course, already. But the point is the symbolism for the fact that God takes their measure. He determines whether evil or bad, and the result, of course, is they're bad. That's the point of the book. And so the result is going to be that the mountains are scattered and the hills bow, and so on. So that God's ways are everlasting. He's bringing this punishment. He knows he's in charge. He's everlasting. Back to the thing about coming from Teman. No, he's always been here, and he always will be, and he has the power, the only one who has the right to do the things he said in this book that he's going to do. Okay? I'll comment through verse 6. All right, then verse 7, he talks about a couple of nations, a couple of countries. When we know about who those countries were, question number 8, were all these countries that he mentions in verse 7. And where are they, Frank?
Cush is Ethiopia down in Africa,
Okay.
south of Egypt, and Midian, I think, was southeast of Israel.
Other direction, northeast.
No, oh, okay, that's right. It was, now I remember seeing it on the map. It was where the Midianites came from, and the Assyrians. It was the empire from almost from India clear over to the Black Sea.
Okay. They're northeast. Maybe not that far as you described, but they're northeast. So what you really got is the Cushites, the Ethiopians, way off to the southwest, and the Midianites to the northeast. In other words, it's symbolism for the nations around the people of Israel, and all of them there's going to be affliction, there's going to be trembling. So again, God's actions of punishment are going to affect people from miles and miles around. Why? The Babylonians took a huge territory when they came and affected many, many people. And these nations are just symbolic of the suffering that's going to come because of God's plan to bring the Babylonians to punish the people, not just of Judah, but all the nations around about as well. Okay? Other comments through verse 7. Okay? All right, we'll take up in verse 8 then next time, unless you have some other comments. Okay, thank you.